On today's episode, we'll learn about how being politically correct really just means being decent to other people. Examine why believing in the Department of Education is a sign that you are educated. Explore the mind of someone who loves wearing masks and forcing their children to wear them as well. And we'll learn about why wokeism and cancel culture aren't actually that big of things to worry about. This is Cringe Post. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cringe Post. I'm Britt.
And I'm Donald.
And we're here to take on the online takes that make you cringe. And boy, do we have a show for you today. But first of all, we like to start out with kind of poking fun at ourselves, because if we're going to poke fun at other people, might as well make fun of ourselves first, all in good spirit. And today we're going to be making fun of my co-host, Donnie. And on January 19th, 2012, Donnie writes, Rick Perry drops out and endorses Gingrich. I knew he would drop out soon, but I'd hoped he might endorse Santorum. And then he goes on to write, oh gosh, Ron Paul has awful foreign policy. He's fiscally conservative and socially liberal. No, please. Which I think you mean no thank you in that. And then you must be replying to someone else, but you say, well, even if he did something, it would be reducing our security. So this is the Santorum-loving Donald Kimball.
Yeah, a very short-lived Donald. I think, you know, my libertarian leanings were actually there in 2012, believe it or not. And the reason I liked Santorum is because he seemed to be that Tea Party conservative. And Ron Paul was just a little too nutty for me. But Santorum was the reasonable Tea Party conservative who ultimately, of course, betrayed me when he, you know, recommended minimum wage increase and those kind of garbage. Yeah. But I mean, there's obviously a ton cringy about this. I mean, one, Rick Perry dropping out and endorsing Gingrich mattering. Like, who cares? That's so not noteworthy. And like, oh man, dang, Santorum didn't get the Rick Perry endorsement. Rats. Yeah, like, oh, I mean, just from a strategic point, it's not like Rick Perry's a kingmaker, and it's not like, you know, that's a big win even ideologically. And what I will say is, you know, Rick Perry is blah, whatever, but like he's not the absolute worst Republican. Like right now, like we're now between Rick Perry and Santorum, I would actually take Rick Perry because Santorum is terrible. So that's even worse for me now. And then there's the classic cringe at the he's fiscally conservative and socially liberal, which really means
I don't think he is either. I don't think he's socially liberal.
No, he's not. That's the funny thing is I think the Libertarian Party branding really got to me. And that's, I mean, part of the reason why I'm such a supporter of like the Mises Caucus now within the Libertarian Party is because they're trying to take the messaging beyond this cringe, fiscally conservative, socially liberal. Because if that's what the buzzword libertarian meant to me, I obviously had no idea what the actual policy was.
I can't stand Nick Sarwark's "all your freedoms, all of the time" thing. It's just like this was cooked up in a committee, and you thought it was clever, and it's just so just smarmy and that's that. I mean, that's what's really funny and cringe about this, though, right? Is like you're using this cringe like cliche of fiscally conservative, socially liberal, but it's still wrong, right? Because Dr. Paul's like, a country doctor that's a Christian and, you know, basically as conservative as you can be on most like, you know, values, social values at least.
Well, and you'd think that would clue me in if I'd bothered to do any of the research, but obviously I hadn't, and obviously I really miss the deleted comments because I'm curious what the reply was that I was replying to, because my initial sentence starting with, well, even if he did something, it would be reducing our security. And I don't know, from my perspective, if Dr. Paul got into the office of the presidency and did nothing, that would be the best president we've had in the U.S. So it's like, even if he did something, as though like doing nothing's a bad thing. And then you would be reducing our security, which, you know, a bad, cringy take. I think we've mocked our own dismissal of the Ron Paul foreign policy here before, but it's not my brightest moment, not one I'm super fond of.
That's right. We learn and we grow, and then eventually we can poke fun at ourselves. So moving on to our quick cringe segment. This person writes, woke, like PC before it, means being decent to people who are not you. And it is genuinely remarkable how many people are willing to go on record as being firmly opposed to such an endeavor.
this is such a blue-pilled take. And I don't mean that in any sort of political sense, other than the general political meaning. I mean, when I say political, I mean like political party or preference. But just the sort of, when people are using the term woke or the terms that would fit within PC culture, they just mean it with the best intention, and there's no ulterior motives and no negative consequence from it. And that's such a bad response when you see the kinds of ways that people are penalized and punished when they break the PC or woke code. It's not just a matter of being decent to people who are not you. It's a matter of bowing down and catering and actively forcing people to kowtow to the altar of woke or PC verdict. It doesn't matter if someone's offended. If they are, you have to, you can't do whatever you're doing. Rather than, being nice to someone because it might offend them, that's fine. But being the woke and PC culture is not about that. It's about shutting down anyone who dares cross the threshold and dares offend one of the protected groups of the Flavor of the Month groups that they're protecting at the moment. That's not even consistent.
Yeah, and it's the word games that they play, right? Because it's if they talk about systemic racism, like initially what I think of in that scenario is like, okay, so you're saying there are systems in the U.S. government or some system that you haven't named yet that is racist, right? And its whole existence or a big aspect of existence is to perpetrate racism on people and shove different minorities downward. So you'll say that, so it's like, okay, now point to the system that is racist. And I've asked this of many friends that have used that term, and they never can define it, right? And so what they do is then they backpedal and they go, well, no, I'm not talking about current systems. I'm saying that overall America, 1619 Project has always been racist. That's what I mean by systemic racism. And then you start saying, well, but what you're saying, we got, as a country, we got rid of slavery. We got rid of these things quicker than most other countries did. And yeah, we had crazy bad things like redlining, in the mid 1900s and all that stuff. But I think we're less racist now than we were before. So that means we're getting better. Right. And then they have to shift the definition again. Right. And that's what this whole woke thing is about, is it's not actually about being decent. It's about being able to control what decent means so that you can use it as a bludgeon to hurt anyone that you don't like or that's in your way of, getting what you want. And that's what's really creepy about it. Not to mention, I mean, this is just really cringe to be so smarmy. Well, I just want you to be decent, right? It's okay.
Yeah. Right. Well, and so to me, it also shows the lack of understanding of the value and the importance of free speech, because when they equate PC and woke culture to only being genuinely nice to people and how you can't understand how anyone would be opposed to it, you lose the importance of that manipulation of language. When you think about Dr. Jordan Peterson, what he was known for initially, what his rise to prominence was kicked off with, was him protesting and speaking against these students at the university where he was employed, with this new law that was going to codify, making it a crime to call someone by their non-preferred gender pronoun. And he was not arguing at the time that he wouldn't call a trans person she or her or he or him, depending on the preference. He was protesting the government mandating that speech and the requirement of that speech. And the woke PC culture didn't care that he was going to be decent to those people and refer to them how they preferred it. They cared that he dared defy them controlling the narrative and the language. And of course, anyone who's a student of history should know that when you control the language, you control the population. And that is what ultimately empowers totalitarian regimes. That and being able to disarm your population. But always controlling the mechanisms of communication, of speech, of publishing, all of those. When you can control the language, then you can clamp down on the people. So saying, I just don't understand how people could be so firmly opposed to it, you're just showing that you have a lack of understanding of history then, because this isn't about being opposed to being PC or genuinely nice to people who aren't you. Because using the example from before, Ron Paul is the nicest guy around, but he would also never advocate for mandating someone not swear in front of him, even though that might offend him, Yeah. That's the whole difference, is that I might get offended by someone, blaspheming or using the Lord's name in vain. But I would never mandate a law that would make that a crime because it offends me.
And to be fair, right? Like not to be fair, but these people are never specific, right? It's like when you say, hey, point out what system is racist, because I don't like racism. Like, I don't want someone being treated, less than another because of the color of their skin. But if you're not specific, then there's no way for me to stand with you in that, right? In condemning that. And because there are things that should be condemned, right? Like if I saw someone, a friend that, is black being treated poorly, like I would stand up for them, right? Because I can specifically point to like, yeah, he's being treated poorly, or this wrong has been, been enacted upon him. But that's kind of like the convenient thing about these woke police people is they're never specific. They never have a specific example. They never have something that they can point to that you can say, oh yeah, like I don't like this, and I agree with you that we should, an injustice has been perpetrated here. And what's kind of funny is like when those things are pointed out, like generally because people are, mostly decent in the United States, they do stand up and they do condemn it, and usually the perpetrator is either pushed to the margins of society, or they're not in business, or whatever, and I think that's a good like kind of litmus test to test these woke people when they start spewing this nonsense. It's like, well, how specific is this? Is there something I can actually point to, when they're saying these things that I can actually be against, or I can, is there a right that needs to be wronged here? And majority of the time they don't have that. Other people do, but majority of the time they don't.
Agreed.
Cool. So moving on to our next quick cringe in this segment. So we've got a tweet from Thomas Massey, Representative Thomas Massey, and he says, "We just reintroduced H.R. 899 to improve education in the states. The bill is one sentence. The Department of Education shall terminate on December 31st, 2022. And then he lists out a bunch of different sponsors with it. And then this other person replied to it, "Oh, holy crap. Of course that bunch doesn't believe in education."
What I love about this, and why, when I saw that reply tweet, because it was like the first one I saw, why I just absolutely jumped on it is because the irony of someone, believing in education and then instantly just assuming, oh, it's the Department of Education, they want it canceled, therefore they don't believe in education, is perhaps the least nuanced or educated take imaginable.
That's funny, yeah. What year was that implemented, right? It was like the 70s, right? Or
yeah.
69?
I think it was 60s or 70s, as long as the Department of Education has been around.
Most people don't understand that, like, the Department of Education has not been a mainstay of the United States ever since we, incorporated. But, on top of that, right, basically every year since, the Department of Education was created, by their own metrics, they failed. Their testing scores, all those things have been on a decline ever since then. So by their metric and any reasonable person's metric, abolishing the Department of Education might be a good thing.
Yeah, well, that's, and like that metric that they set up was, I believe, a 20-year metric that extended, or it was something where, they're like, they weren't trying to measure, year one and say, because obviously it takes a while. You can't expect the first year something to be implemented for the results to be turned out right away. So this was like, it was like a decade or 2 decades or 3. They set up these long-term goals. And it wasn't an outside source that were setting these. This, like you said, this was the Department of Education setting their own goals. And in terms of funding per student, what kept increasing, and the output result for testing averages and student graduation numbers was absolutely not meeting any of the criteria that they set up to be successful. And so you can argue that maybe the Department of Education should be reformed and not abolished. That's fine. But you also have to acknowledge that it's failed. And so when this tweet comes out and it's, the bill is one sentence and it should be terminated, just the easy jump to, oh, they don't believe in education. It's like, no, they believe in getting rid of an institution that's failed by its own metrics. Yeah. This has got to be the kind of person who prides themselves for seeing through, the Patriot Act.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
That's,
you're not a patriot if you don't support the Patriot Act.
Right, and it makes me think of a webcomic meme that's like that, you know, who's dumb enough to fall for that? And it's like all these traps, and then they walk into the exact trap themselves and by a different name. And that's what this is, you know, they look at the Patriot Act. Oh, I don't support it and I'm not a patriot. Who'd be dumb enough to fall for that? Department of Education. Oh, they don't believe in education. That's all it is. It's
kind of like freaking Operation Iraqi Freedom. It's like, it's like, okay, yeah, you basically bombed people into oblivion. Technically, they're free because they're no longer under the oppression of their government. But that's not the way we wanted them to be free.
No.
That's what,
yeah. Oh, geez.
I saw this meme the other day. Someone was like, oh yeah, like the spending per student has increased 280%. Yet testing standards have failed. And then someone had replied to it like, oh, well, like, of course it has, like inflation, right? Like that's why it's like, no, 280% accounting for inflation. So, you know, it's just, the government is funny in that it's the only system that can fail repeatedly and somehow get more and more and more and more money.
Yeah.
You do a worse job, you get a raise. Man, that sounds, that's crazy, man. How's that work?
Yeah, I'm thinking about quitting my job and just trying that out, you know, starting my own business and just call it government too.
The same institution that runs the DOL that we all hate standing in line for is also responsible for educating our most impressionable citizens. That sounds like a good thing to do.
Maybe I should try to abolish the Department of Licensing, and then someone could say, holy crap, this person doesn't believe in good driving standards. It's like, oh no.
All right, moving on to our next one. This person says, I saw a post about how sad it is for kids to always have to wear masks and grow up without seeing other people's faces. So I'm going to come clean and say it. I love masks. They keep my face warm outside, and they keep my kids warm too. It seems to help their asthma because usually when they breathe a lot of cold air, they cough a lot, and they haven't been coughing. They have only been mildly sick about 2 times all of 2020. I also love how careful the general public is about touching things and germs. It's like everyone is finally on the same page, mostly about keeping each other healthy.
Do you want to dive in? Because I just there's so many.
It's hard for me to get through it because it's really funny. I don't know anyone in their right mind loves wearing, you know, a snot covered, breath covered mask on their face all day. You know, that pulls on your ears, and much less kids, right? Kids definitely don't like that. It's just like, this is such a weird, over-the-top virtue signal. It's like, you know, I went on a hike on Saturday. It was a 4-mile hike, and I was, like, pretty tired during it and out of breath. And it's outdoors. You know, you're exercising, and it's like, anyone knows, it's like, man, I probably shouldn't breathe what I'm exhaling when I'm exercising. But yet while I'm on that trail, I see people wearing masks. Sometimes some of them are by themselves, right? Like outside, basically zero transmission of COVID-19 outdoors. And then on top of that, it's like, man, like there's a reason why your body exhales things when you're exercising, right? It's not for you to breathe them back in. But it's, you know, I can't help but think, you know, I know we've done other segments on this, but people want to wear masks because they don't want to be associated as a Republican, right? Or whatever. You know, Republicans have all their issues, and I'm not a huge fan of them either. But regardless, it's like, man, like if you're going to trust the science, TM, it's like, you know, making sure that your body can exhale what you breathe in is probably a pretty important thing to do. And I feel sad for this person's kids, you know, that they have to be subjected to this person's virtue signaling at the expense of their health.
And the thing to me is this is a giant red herring from any of the arguments that it allegedly addresses. So it says, I saw a post about how sad it is for kids always to have to wear masks and grow up without seeing other people's faces, full face. No acknowledgement of anything about that other than my kids have only gotten mildly sick. You do not address how it's good for kids or how it could, or dispel anything of why it could be harmful for kids. You don't at all address about the neglect of seeing other people's full faces. She just completely ignores those points and then talks about why I love it. It's like, oh, okay, but you don't understand the actual harms here if you're not willing to address them. I mean, it's in the same way. It would be like, if you know those bubbles that people have to wear that are, you know, super super sick or like super super compromised immune systems, so they don't let anything in. And it's like, it's really sad for people who have to wear those bubbles because, you know, they can't have human contact and feel other people or live a normal life about being able to hike or be able to go through society normally. And then this person being like, I saw a post about that, but I was just gonna come out and say, I love being in a bubble. You know, you get to roll around on the ground sometimes and it's kind of squishy and you feel like you're in Space Invaders. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't address any of the problems that we brought up. So this person just says, look, I like wearing masks, so I'm going to make sure every other person's kids in society is prevented from seeing faces and socializing and developing their brain as young kids need to do, and to see other human faces to understand what diversity looks like. If you're actually talking about biological diversity, young children form their impressions of what humans look like by seeing people's faces and seeing people who don't look like them. Because obviously when a baby's born, they're more comfortable with people who look genetically like them. That's how they identify with their, you know, mother, father, family members and stuff. So when you actually can expose your kid to seeing other kinds of people who look different, that developmentally helps them become more, you know, initially open-minded. Obviously you have to teach them and things on how to behave, but just as a biological mechanism, these people who probably also care about diversity, but they don't really care about diversity in this way because, you know, you want a virtue signal about your mask wearing.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they use, kind of like you were saying, there's no data, there's no argument being made about her first, you know, sentence. It's just a personal anecdote. And
right.
It's not even an anecdote. It's just like, I like this, so everyone should do it. And what really terrifies me about it is like, hey, my kids have asthma, and I think this is good for them. There's no reason to believe that breathing in what you exhale in higher doses is good for your asthma. Like there's no research on that, or there's no data that indicates that's a good thing. Getting more circulation and air circulation is generally what's good for asthma. Because usually what that means is like you're not breathing in enough air, right? And that's what masks do, is they restrict airflow. That's why they're supposedly supposed to work in curbing any sort of transmission of a virus. Is they restrict airflow, which is the opposite of what you want to do if you've got asthma. Yeah.
One other thing I do want to say, that the last line where she adds, like, I also love how careful the general public is about touching things and germs. I don't actually disagree. Like, I like that in public you're getting some space. I think it's to a ridiculous point. Like, I think it's to the point where, you know, my fiance and I are in a Target and the, you know, 1 foot of ours is off the little sticker that says step here, and the people in front of us tell the cashier to tell us to step back, even though it's a single foot out. Like, I mean, utterly ridiculous. I don't love that, but I do love in general things being cleaner, because I like it when things are clean. But that is not to say that the mandated masks, the mandates from the government for businesses to be shut down, or any of these ridiculous, unscientific edicts that are being put out are worth it, or that any of it is remotely comparable. I mean, like, I can say, oh yeah, businesses were shut down and I was forced to work from home. Well, yeah, I like not having my commute, but that doesn't justify the shutdowns of the economy and the ruining of people's businesses and lives. Yeah. I mean, it's not wrong, but it is such a minute, pointless thing to say in the grand scheme of things. In the face of your children's freedom to live and grow and learn and develop, versus, well, it's kind of nice that people are a little bit more sensitive about touching me. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's to the point. Do you remember that Community episode where I can't remember the British guy's name, but he gets the restraining order against Chang, and anywhere Chang goes, he's like using the force to like move him back. It's kind of like that out in public. Like if you like take 2 steps towards a person, they're like wanting to go back, and so it's like, okay, too far, right? Like happy everything's clean, but there shouldn't be an imaginary force field where you recoil at a person's presence. And, yeah.
Well, it's kind of like, you know, if you go to a restaurant, I kind of like that now there's not someone sitting at the table next to me, but like, that's just going to bounce. Yeah, it's bad for the business, bad for, it's not scientific, it's, you know, all that, but I mean, I kind of like that, but that doesn't mean it's something I'm going to post online and be like, you know, I've seen people that are complaining about the government shutting down their business and taking away their source of income, but I'm going to say it. I like having more elbow room when I eat.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Cool. Moving on to our long cringe segment. This person writes, the national GOP and some adjacent loves to talk about culture war grievances. Quote, cancel culture, wokeism, etc. Precisely because there is no policy solution to it. The perpetual unsolvable grievance is a feature, not a bug for them. They're not running on doing anything about it. There isn't anything for government and electoral politics to do about it. They get to run on being a performative counterweight to liberalism with no consequences for failing to deliver because there's no possible success or failure. There will always be some left-of-center cultural phenomenon they can use elective office to performatively condemn. They get to fuel their base on pure performance art instead of any kind of governing agenda they can be held accountable for.
So, I want to break down this post because I don't think it is entirely inaccurate. However, understanding the context where it comes from and breaking down some of the problems with the post makes it shake out a little bit to be a little bit more cringe here. So, first of all, this is coming from someone within the libertarian circle. And it's one of the libertarians who I would proudly call a member of the loser brigade, for those who are familiar with sort of the inner libertarian politics fighting. Someone who I think is not very focused on the right things in libertarianism and like promoting actual freedom. He's kind of the person who during this COVID wouldn't want to stand up boldly and tell people no, we need to fight for our freedoms back. They're kind of the cowering, like, well, I don't want to get chewed out by the mainstream media types. So that's who's giving this post.
That's ironic.
And I want to talk about what the key things in here that are right, and then the key things in here that are wrong. So I will say that there are a lot of GOP politicians that do this, that they take certain aspects culturally left usually, they run on them, and then don't do anything to fix them. However, that is not a GOP thing. That is a politician thing. That happens no matter what party you're running on. And I would argue that it actually probably has happened the most with the GOP in abortion. I think that there are a lot of Republicans who actually don't care about abortion, but they love running on it because they know that people actually do care about that. But then they get into office and they don't actually do anything about it. There are a couple of notable exceptions. So I think he's right in that sense. But I think it's very focused in on this very like, oh, cancel culture and wokeism without acknowledging that those are actual problems. Yeah. They're not just cultural left phenomenon. Secondly, let's see, there will always be some left. They fuel their base on performative art. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So that's kind of the main thing I think he gets right in that it exists. The problem is he segments it. Now, I'm going to strongly disagree with the idea that, there's a performative counterweight to it with no consequences and no policy solution and there's no outcome for these things. Because what I will say is that I would argue that I think Rand Paul has specifically changed this narrative for me where I don't know that he's actually promoted any kind of a policy solution to like COVID, for instance. However, he has been in a position where he has publicly been questioning Fauci and publicly driving the discussion and publicly driving the Overton window into ways where, like, Facebook was, for instance, deleting videos of anyone who had any sort of theory on whether or not COVID was created from a Wuhan lab. Now, Rand has been pushing this narrative. Now, he hasn't had a policy solution to it, but he's been pushing Fauci and making more people question whether or not this could be a possibility, to the point where now there are all these articles coming out saying it's actually probably the most likely scenario that it was man-made. And so I think that this take completely ignores the idea and the power of narrative, even within politics, even if there's not a policy solution, but of loud voices decrying cancers like cancel culture and wokeism, and publicly giving people the confidence to say, oh, I'm not alone here. It's a local minority that's shouting me down for instance, saying naughty words that are going to get me canceled. So I think that point right there is just definitively wrong. Even if there's not a policy solution, always, I do think that it's helpful to have national voices within politics speaking up for these ideas.
Yeah, and I appreciate like the recognition that he has, that politicians just grab on to the kind of the move with the times sort of attitude.
Yeah,
whatever's fashionable for my base is what I'm going to do right now. And if bashing cancel culture and wokeism is all I need to do to get reelected and get a $180,000 a year salary, then heck yeah, I'm going to do it. And then once I'm in, I'm going to bend to whatever pressures exist in there. Like, that's definitely true. But this is done in such a way that, like you were saying, it just ignores that it's a problem, and it doesn't offer even any solution for the problem that it's trying to like say that exists, right? Like
right.
That's what's so weird and ironic about this is that you would think that if you're saying that these are a problem and people aren't actually like addressing it, that you would want to offer up some sort of like, we should talk about this. Like, we should pressure these people to talk about it or to enact some sort of policy. Like, I know you and I don't agree that anyone should do that, but this person, for whatever reason, seems to be a bit of an authoritarian libertarian, if that can exist. But it's like, if you want to, advocate for a policy or something like that, then advocate for it. But this person kind of caves to their own criticism, and that this is just pure performance art, and that they're saying they're doing this to get some likes and some claps, and being able to say, oh yeah, like I stood up to that GOP, and they don't really mean what they're saying, and this isn't that big of a problem, and we shouldn't really be paying attention to it. Here's other things that we should do, insert all your freedoms all the time catchphrase.
Well, you're right. Isn't it ironic that he's making a post and specifically complaining about a problem with no policy solution to it? Like, his grievance right now.
And this guy and this whole like sect of the Libertarian Party, it's like, okay, like you guys talk about all your freedoms all the time, but like, where the heck were you when the lockdowns were happening? Where the heck were you, when our freedoms were being taken away? Like, you wouldn't stand and condemn that. Where were you when, cities and businesses were being burned down? You wouldn't say anything about it. You wouldn't say nothing, right? And so you only exist to use that for your own political and personal gain. And so, obviously we try and focus on just the individual post itself, but, the history of this person, it's like, well, I don't know if they actually believe what they're saying. They must be part of that cancel culture mob because they generally don't want to be specific or point to solutions.
And they are. And oftentimes him, I'm not sure if he specifically has, though I'm sure he has, but at least people in his camp will say things like, it's not cancel culture, it's consequence culture. And that's such a bad understanding of what's actually going on in so many cases. So much of the cancel culture problem is some issue being brought to light, it not being fully adjudicated, and the internet usually in swarms of mobs pressuring other people to cancel and not interact with this person and to completely destroy this person's lives, whether or not it's correct or not. I mean, I can think of so many examples of people, like there was a guy in a truck who was literally resting his hand out of his car, and they tried to cancel the truck driver because he was doing like this outside, and it was because he like just flicked a cigarette or something. I don't exactly remember what it was
in the moment. Yeah.
And so again, like this person is trying to say like, oh, they love talking about the culture war because there's no policy solution to it, and they can just cry about it. And it's like, well, yeah, but like when it's a cultural issue like that, there is a purpose in calling it out and condemning it and promoting a culture of free speech. I think, for instance, enshrining rights is one thing, and that's what the Constitution attempted to do, especially the Bill of Rights. It tries to secure these negative rights, like the right to free speech or the right to defend yourself. The problem is that the left will always have the ability, and many on the right too, the authoritarian right, will always have the ability to enshrine whatever edicts they want into law, an active burden or requirement into law. And the disadvantage of someone who, like you or I, who are more principled in the freedom and liberty philosophies, is that we, as much as we want those people to be free to do things, we don't want to force people, and we can't like make a law that you have to act in these good moral ways. We can't enact a law that requires everyone to sit down and listen to a history of why free speech is important, because that is by its very nature an authoritarian edict that we wouldn't believe in. And so our entire arsenal is cultural movements, creating a culture of free speech and a culture that rejects wokeism by speaking up and by doing these things. So this person who, again, his whole job is influencing and writing and trying to promote these cultures, is complaining about the GOP doing the same thing, the only difference being it's on these specific policies that are kind of or not policies, the specific phenomenon like cancel culture and wokeism that are currently in vogue with the mainstream media. And so he wants to look guys, aren't I a pretty boy making fun of the GOP for complaining about these things? I don't think they're issues. I don't think it's a problem.
You know, it's funny when you talk about like consequence culture or whatever. These people like they play both sides of the fence, right? Because I remember when the whole social media censorship was going on. Well, they're like, oh, but it's a private business. They can do whatever. It's like, you're missing the point, right? Like we're trying to change how people think so that we're live in a freer and better society. And yeah, we don't believe that the government should come down and mandate things for people. You ask any sane person, can the government make them a better person? And everyone's going to say no, because it's a priority almost at that point. Yeah. That's like, there's no way the government can make us better people. So whose job is it to help shape society to be better? It's like, well, individuals. And how do you get individuals on board? By making a powerful and compelling messaging and statement that, people resonate with and that makes sense and that's clear. And, these people, like, they play both sides of it, because they use the libertarian ideology as a way to gain whatever limited amount of status they can have, in the actual party. And so whatever, like you were saying, is in vogue, right, is kind of going to differentiate themselves and make them popular with the press or the blue checkmark kind of people, is the stance they're going to hold. So they're totally fine with cancel culture and wokeism, calling it consequence culture. When it's Facebook and all these different places, and or you know what I'm saying. And it's just they straddle both sides of it, and they don't actually hold a principle. And it's just it's so funny, man. Like, every time I read this one, it gets me when he calls it performance art, because it's like this is performance art within performance art. Right here.
Yeah,
it's Inception.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is, when it's a private platform, they can do what they want, and it's like, cool. I'm advocating for them to not do that thing, because as a customer of that platform, I also can voice my opinion in a non-coercive way. There is something to be said when they use the "it's a private platform" excuse when there's some right-winger populist who says we need to legislate them to not do it, which I'm like, okay, I actually don't believe in legislating it. So I agree with you there that it's a private platform. But when I say something like, I don't think they should have deplatformed Alex Jones, I don't love Alex Jones, they should not have deplatformed him, then they're like, oh, it's a private company. I'm like, yeah, and it's a private company, and I'm leaving my customer review. I'm trying to give feedback, like, in a non-coercive, like, that's the power of the market and the voices, right?
And that's a really good point, because you think about a lot of these, like I was thinking about the T-Mobile guy, executive, that he like donated to some pro-life thing years ago, and this pro-choice organization found out about it, got him fired from his job. And the reason these private companies are so freaking scared is because we've got a really loud minority that, literally goes and burns down buildings if they don't get their way. And it's like, okay, well, what's the antidote to that, right? Well, it's speaking out and telling these companies like, hey, look, like, the majority of us think this is dumb, and we just want you to provide good services for us ethically, right? Like, if we know that you're killing people, then we don't want you to do that, but we want you to provide service to us that we bought, right? And because no one's doing that, because the majority is pretty silent on that, because, if this guy had his way, the GOP would be silent about cancel culture. No one would ever go and tell these companies like, hey, like, no, we do support you, and we will continue buying from you, even if you don't have, such and such a day, or if you don't implement such and such, DEI policy. And that's kind of the benefit, right? Because we all agree, it's like, we'd be better off without this cancel culture and wokeism. I don't want someone to be canceled because they chose to donate $1,000 to a pro-life organization. I think this person would probably be on board with that. But the only way to get there is to let these companies know that we're okay with that. And currently, right now, the best platform for that would be a politician or some sort of leader, someone who holds a leadership position, whether it's from being put in there by the voters or by virtue of merit. Being able to rally people to do that. And that's the big benefit of these GOP centers. Even if they live basically consequence-free, which I agree with, they suck at their job in terms of being able to actually hold back the tide of any of this stuff, or actually conserving, right? It's in their name, conservative. They don't conserve nothing. They don't conserve anything, not nothing. But like, even the only silver lining is, like, you get a lot of people that are emboldened to speak out and tell these companies, hey, we're okay with it. And we want you to keep, doing your job, and please don't bow to this cancel culture. And that's how you make society better. It's not just
Right.
by shutting up and saying it is what it is.
For as much as I dislike so much of what he did, and I think even in this he went too far, one of the best things about Donald Trump was the repudiation of the policing of language and ideas, and it was an abject rejection of that, for sure. And so, Trump didn't stem the tide of wokeism by any means, but he certainly did reinvigorate a lot of people to feel like, this is ridiculous. I am just going to say things how they are. Again, maybe to the point of a little too far in his style, and I would have much preferred someone who could do that boldly, but in a way that was coherent and not, I don't know, making fun of someone for small hands. Like, that's petty and such a waste. Like, imagine trying, inspiring free speech and a rejection of woke politics to use it to pettily insult your foes. Like, that's such a lowbrow use of it.
Very Trumpian.
Yeah, and it's just such. I mean, like, I'm glad that we have a pushback, but for that end, for it just to be on petty insults, it's just a wasted opportunity. I don't care that he said mean words on Twitter. I care that he didn't use it in a way that elevated the conversation to big ideas, to saying, screw the policing of language. I'm going to say these things because they're true and because people need to risk being offensive to have worthwhile conversations and to move big ideas in this country. And this is a nation that will always defend everyone's individual right to exploring the truth. And through that means using whatever language they want to, whether it's harmful and hurtful to some people or not. We need to create a culture of whatever. So, Trump didn't litigate anything like that. And he wasn't perfect by any means, but that was one of the better things about him. And he was a national GOP person complaining about that.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. I don't have anything else. You got any more on this one?
I think I could beat a dead horse on this one just because it's just so frustrating to see such a willful ignorance on it. It feels like, but no, I think I'm good. I think I'll let him lie.
Well, friends, we appreciate you tuning in and listen. If you disagreed with anything we said, or if we said something cringy, be sure to let us know in the comments. You can also reach us at any of our socials. It's just Cringe Post Pod. We'll be here with our next episode here soon, and thanks for tuning in.
Take care.